we saw. Um, we're quite fortunate today because we have speakers from 3 of our member centers who will be able to provide us with a kind of very unique insight into the obstacles that the pandemic created, as well as how they responded today. And those speakers come from Viva Zena in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Tree of Life in Zimbabwe, as well as Sintras in Chile. And as I mentioned, these experiences are very varied, but I think there are also a lot of cross-cutting and similarities between them. And just as a last note, I mean, I'm very keen on hearing from everyone here at the webinar today, and for this to be a space for you to share that, to share your experiences and your lessons learned with us, because we're as mentioned, we're very keen on capturing this, to be able to share it not just with the wider anti-torture community, but actually the wider human rights community. So with that out of the way, I'll just very briefly talk about, from a global perspective, how the pandemic impacted the work of the rehabilitation centers, as well as how you all responded to it, at least from what we saw. So the pandemic, I mean, we know it impacted the lives of everyone around the world, but we also know that it didn't impact our lives equally or evenly. And that existing inequalities and discrimination meant that marginalized and vulnerable communities were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. We even see in early academic research on the impact of COVID on torture, that we have this kind of two-pronged, on the one hand, economic crises, and on the second hand, public health crises. So on the one hand, you have an economic crisis and a public health crisis, which then produces reactions from citizens in the form of protests, and which then triggers opposing reactions from governments in the form of lockdowns, but also repression. And we've seen that in the experiences that many of our members have reported to us, an increase of torture and ill treatment in the context of lockdowns, more police force against protesters, as well as the kind of what they term the shadow pandemic of domestic violence, and increased use of and very poor prison conditions as well in this context. From the rehabilitation center's perspective, we know that I mean, you work in an industry where or a field where the entire kind of essence of the work is predicated on contact between survivors and service providers. And of course, when you're forced to close down centers as a part of lockdowns, and people can't actually have access to their clients, that presents very, very real and acute challenges to the way you work and we work. So you know, things like actual meetings with victims became very difficult, if not impossible. But we also know that a lot of torture survivors, if in fact the majority of torture survivors, live in poverty or work in low-income jobs, and these are jobs that unfortunately you can't, quote unquote, work from home from. And as a result, many of them lost their incomes from as day laborers, or also working in the service sectors, as restaurants, hotels, so on. And so you have an acute economic crisis, followed by the general sense of anxiety and social isolation that stems from not being able to see family, not being able to see friends, not being able to see your community, losing contact to your service provider, but then also the general sense of anxiety brought about by this being very unfamiliar for everyone in living memory. What we saw very quickly was that, or from the IRCT's perspective, was that our members didn't wait around, that they reacted very rapidly to these situations, that you adapted your work to service the needs of your clients. You mobilized financial resources to those who couldn't work or feed their families. You retrained your staff in providing virtual telehealth. You funded telephone, SMS, and to your clients. You organized mobile clinics so you could reach out to communities, work from home system, duty of care, stress, and supporting your staff, helping each other. And I think that was, from our side, extremely extremely empowering and also inspiring to see. But this also required investment. I mean, buying new laptops, sending money to clients. In many countries, we saw that they weren't allowed to reopen until they invested in buying new facilities in their offices, and all of this required money: wages for staff, rent, IT equipment, telephone credit, telehealth platforms. None of that comes cheap. Protective equipment. And as a result of that, we felt that it was very important to send out emergency grants to members around the world. And at the end of the period, we distributed some 600,000 euros across 63 countries, to our 63 member centers in 54 countries around the world. And that was just a way to allow our centers to really react. I think just the final point for me before we start the discussion, it is perhaps a slight oddity in the sense that we're discussing maybe lessons learned here, or we're talking as if somehow we're looking back at the pandemic when I think we know that the pandemic continues to rage across most of the world, and we spoke about that unequal impact of the pandemic. And we know that, especially for us that are in the global north, where our governments have been stockpiling vaccines and preventing their distribution to the global south, that somehow normal life has slowly begun to resume for us. I think it's important that we remind ourselves that this isn't the case, and we know from speaking to you all that the pandemic continues to play a very, very large role in your lives. And we hear about fourth and fifth waves. Hello? Sorry. And so I think that's important to bear in mind, that we reflect on what we've learned, but also to send a strong message to the rest of the human rights community, as well as donors, that this isn't over, and that we continue to have needs and continue to need resources for our members to adapt flexibly and in an agile manner to their needs. If I could just ask everyone to mute their microphones kindly, and because I think there's a bit of noise. But I think at this stage I will stop and I'll give the floor to our presenters. So today we have Jasna Zečević from Viva Zene in Bosnia-Herzegovina. We have Lynn Walker from Tree of Life in Zimbabwe, and Jose Miguel Guzman from Sintras in Chile. They will each make a short 7 to 8 minute presentation, and following their presentations, you will have 2 or 3 minutes for immediate reactions and comments. And at the end of the 3 presentations, we will open the discussion in plenary. And as I mentioned, I'm very, very keen on hearing from as many of you as possible, because we are still in the process of understanding what's happened in the past 18 months and learning lessons and trying to put that on paper. As Berta mentioned, we will record the session and make it available to all those who couldn't make it. And hopefully this is something that we can learn on. So without further ado, I would very much like to hand over to Jasna from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Jasna, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Dustin. Thank you all. And thank you for IRCT to inviting me to share our experience in our work and impact of COVID on Viva Zene work with torture survivors, war trauma survivors, and violence, domestic violence that we are working. So now when Dustin started to talk about that we have to share and also to lessons learned, but the first moment when pandemic started, we thought in Viva Zene that we learned some lessons from before, from the war, and that we are prepared for any crisis that is coming. But unfortunately, I think still that we didn't learn a lot, and that it's in the nature of the people that you just always hope that something will not happen, even it's so obvious it will happen. And in March in 2020, when pandemic started, we thought it will stay out of Bosnia, so it will not come. Even it was in Croatia, it was in Serbia, but somehow we thought it will not come because we are a small town, we are not very close to each other. So we take care about the children and everything, but it came. So I just wanted to point out that we, as a human being, it's very hard that we learn from our previous experience, and we show that in wars and repetition of the wars. So when it started in Viva Žene, I have to mention that we are working with war trauma survivors. That they are living in northeast Bosnia. Tuzla is a small town settled in Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And Viva Žene faced problems on a 2 levels in that moment. One is our safe house when we had domestic violence victims, and the program with torture survivors that we are working in the communities. In that moment, we had 200 beneficiaries in the communities, in different groups that we are working. And in the shelter, we had 15 women and children. So first we were confused which instruction we have to follow, because we as NGO, non-governmental organization, we don't have a status in Bosnia and Herzegovina that you can say that we belong to the public system, to the any system. So we had a feeling like we are abandoned, that no one will take care. I mean, not that to take care about us, but to which instruction we should follow if we consider that we have a woman in the center and the children. So we are like a social institution, but officially we are not. We are just association of citizens. So it was one organizational fight that we have to struggle and fight with the commissions and everyone who is imposing those measures, to ask for hygienic articles, for everything what is needed for the social institution. And on the other hand, we have to deal with beneficiary in the community. And our problem was first that we thought this will last for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, so we will manage. We had experience of the war, so we survived shelling and war and everything. We will survive also this. We just have to be calm and to wait maybe 1 month. And that was in March and April, in the beginning of pandemic. But in that moment also financial situation was very critical, because we had running projects, and the projects were aimed to work in the community, to gathering bigger groups of the people, more than 10, 20 in the groups, and it was forbidden. On other hand, we have safe house that you don't have room for isolation, because according to the rules, we had to provide isolation space for the women and children when they are coming, and they should be tested. So it was 2 parallel processes that we have to fight and to face. One is organizational, that some of us who are in managing team, we discussed with the government representatives to help us to have all this disinfection and all materials that we didn't have in a budget, because we all, as everyone in the world, planned normal 20 to 20, that we will work normally. No one planned some masks or disinfection material, everything what was needed, and we didn't have in any budget some extra money. And on the other hand, we've been called by our beneficiary from the community to see when we will continue. And we decided immediately after 2 weeks of beginning of pandemic that we will go in a field visit. So that was really very challenging and very brave, because we have to decide in the car, it should go just one therapist. So it was also costly, because usually when we are going in community, we are going in one car, 4 persons, and then we start to work in the groups. But because of this fear, it was enormous fear that we will get COVID. So that was also costly. But we decided that we at least have to visit them in their homes, not to make immediately group session, but just to visit our beneficiary and to show them that we are with them. And in meantime, the management and me personally, we really mobilized a lot of embassies in Bosnia and other, like UN Women, like Swiss Embassy and other international community. We sent more than 200 letters also to private companies to support us to provide food and food parcels to the beneficiary. And we were lucky that some of international, but I have to emphasize, it was only international community that respond to our appeal. And we organized food parcels to the community, our beneficiary community, because most of them, they are, like you said, Dustin, anyway, they are living in a poverty. So for them, it was a sign that they are not alone. And it's what we did one research in June in 2020 about their rights, about access to the health institution, access to the labor. So, and what does it mean for them, our direct contact? So we get all the answers from them, and most of, especially women victims of sexual violence during the war, they were very grateful, and they show this expression like, if we didn't come,
Yes,
she will.
yes.
Sorry.
Could you come a little bit closer to your microphone? The interpreters are having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
It is
Thank
here.
you.
Is it better? So for the women, especially for the women who are living in communities, they said that when pandemic started and when they went out and see the shops that were empty, that the food were missing, and lockdown with police hour, all that remind them on the war, because in the beginning of the war, it was the same situation in those villages. So for them, pandemic and the situation, it came like accumulation, so like upgrading their trauma. So they, even it is 30 years after the war, so they have still very, very vivid remembering of how it was in 90s, in the same time, March and April in 1992. So that was for us a sign that we cannot work from home because it's not possible. As you said, all our work is based on the direct contact. And that was the problem with, I think, all centers in the IRCT network, that our task is to be with the people. And in that sense, we organize Viber groups, because not all of them have computers. Most of them, they don't have computers to have Zoom and other this online platform, but we organize by the Viber groups. And we also ask from the donors to buy phone small for them, for these smartphones, but the cheapest one, that they can communicate with us beside working in the community. So we continuously for 10 months, from April 2020, 10 months, we continuously provide the food parcels. And also with IRCT supports, we provide food parcels for them. It was really, beside, of course, therapy session, it was really very important that they are not left alone. And I think that lessons, what we learn is that for trauma, for people who survive war and trauma, that it's important, at least the feeling that they are not alone. So you can talk with them even if you are not therapist. I mean, I went on the field and I'm not a therapist, I'm manager of the organization, but I sit with them and drink coffee and share these food parcels and just remind them that they can call whenever they want until the situation is finished. So after, late in 2020, situation changed a little bit. So we start with the normal, regular activities, but it's always the presence of COVID is still there, because we thought it will be 2 weeks, but it's not. And what remind us on the war is the same, because in the beginning of the war in Bosnia, we all thought it will be just 1 month or 2 months. And now when we talk with the beneficiary, with the people in the community, they also ask us what we think. What we think really, honestly, not as a therapist, not as a professionals, but as a citizen, what will be in the end? And we don't have any answer. So in that sense, they feel close to us. So somehow this barrier between professionals and beneficiary was also broke down, because maybe it's also good because they understood that we are on the same level, we are suffering on different way, but we are facing a very dangerous COVID virus. So everyone, no one is protected. And then another problem with organizational issue, what we faced, that after all this struggle, and we succeed to get some funds for the isolation room, funds for the continuous support of beneficiary. And we thought this is behind us. We will now work with the mask, with disinfection, and we will work in a smaller groups. But then we had 4 staff members, they get COVID, and 2 of them are older and they were 1 year on sick leave. And you know how it is in NGO, when you have, when they're on sick leave, you don't have immediately the budget to change them. So the staffing was also very hard situation for us. And 2 of them, younger girls, they get some other problems that are not connected with the COVID. They had some malformation in the brain, one young therapist, and she's still on a sick leave. She don't know if she will have operation or not. And in the end of those, everything what we faced with, we get that one of our colleagues just died one morning here in Vivagene, and not because of the COVID, it was because heart attack. So I really thought in one moment that there is no end of the war, of COVID, of all this, what's going on. So just what we understood in the end, and what we learned, that if we want to recover from the crisis, the most important issue is trust in the relation to the state or anyone who is a leader. So we had that feeling in our organization as management, because it was few of us who are staying in Vivagene all the time, 24 hours. So we struggle, we make plans, we ask for donors and everything. So I think that also helped to our beneficiary, that they see us as someone who can lead through the crisis. And that's what we learn, that if you fight all the time, like we fight 27 years, we are almost 28 years that we are working. Even most of the donors forget that war trauma is still present, that continuous rehabilitations are important for the healing. And still, if we are just committed to that, I think that we can overcome any crisis with a lot of losses, and but all of these losses, I think, make us stronger. Maybe it's a phrase, but we learned that from the war. And now we are preparing this 10th of December, the International Day for the Human Rights. And this morning we had a meeting on Zoom with the presidents of Association of the concentration camp survivors. And we organize everything and we plan everything, but now we have new restrictive measure, that it could be just 30 people. And it's just repetition all over. Now we have to think how to manage that everyone, all of them, 200 beneficiaries from community, they want to come to Tuzla. And we wanted that and we organized that. But now it could be just 30 persons. So that will be a next challenge. I mean, that was just from my side in this moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jasna. That was really, really very interesting. I would like to open the floor to see if there are any immediate reactions from anyone or clarification questions. Please just raise your hand or speak up if you have any immediate questions for Jasna.
So
I see Lisa Henry. I would love to give the floor to offer the floor to someone else first, but if there are no takers,
I was waiting patiently.
Then
I would just like
Lisa, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, now I would just like to applaud you, because I think one of the many important points you made was about leadership during this crisis. And I think this is something that we may not often take up as a theme, and I think we should. This visible leadership and this visible sign of solidarity, that we're still here, we're still fighting, and we still have the ability to think agilely on our feet, to adapt and to be there. So I mean, I think this presence of leadership in the form of you being with your staff, as many others on this call, I really think that that's an important learning, that we go out front and we can, with good inputs from people on the ground, show the way. So thanks for that, for pointing that out.
Thank you. You know, if I can just add, yeah, this when you said leadership, you know what was the feeling after all this happened and we managed somehow. Then when this colleague died, and he was our friend also for 27 years together. And in that moment, I had a feeling that, you know, when you have a bread and all these small pieces, when everything fall apart, then I had a feeling that I really have to sit and to collect all this and just to make a new bread. Because everyone was falling apart around me. I was falling apart, of course, because he was my friend. We grow up from the war up to now. And then you just understand that if you fall apart, I don't think that everyone will die for sure, but the people are looking at you in the crisis, especially now when we are in a nice mood, everything, so everyone is doing what they want. I mean, but in the crisis, it's really, that's what I learned now.
Thank you so much, Jasna. Are there any other reflections or questions? I think from my side, Jasna, what was very interesting for me that you mentioned was, you know, first the need to react in a kind of very quick and agile way when the situation is changing so quickly with regard to policy from the state, especially when things aren't so clear. And then also that you mentioned the kind of the need to be available to your patients, your beneficiaries very, very quickly and very promptly to let them know they're not alone, and to help bridge this sense of isolation that they may feel and the loneliness that they may feel from being alone. As well as what I found very interesting was that the pandemic kind of triggered previous trauma, in your case related to the period of the war. And then finally, of course, and important to remember that that you as staff, that there was also a great personal risk for you, and that you, as Lisa mentioned, also demonstrated exceptional leadership to come through that. I see Peace from Uganda has her hand raised. Peace, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you so much. I've really learned a lot from the presenter. And I just want to find out, because I know that the anxiety that was caused and having undergone already the experience of war, I know the pandemic re-triggered, you know, some of those traumas. I just wanted to find out, because I think that is also something that happened to us in Uganda as well. Some of us have experienced already war, and then this trauma again created more anxiety. But I just wanted to find out from your organization, how did you manage to keep the staff going? Because I know the fear that was created, the anxiety, it was quite too much. But then just for me to learn more, something that could also help us to manage, because in Uganda we are still under a partial lockdown, and still also there's a lot of still fear, you know, to reach out there into the communities. But how can you then help some of us to also, you know, manage and move on and adapt to this pandemic that has really created such kind of fear and anxiety? Thank you.
Thank you, Avola. So among the staff, there was some of colleagues that they are not ready to go in the field. They were too afraid, and really too afraid, not just because it remind them on the war, but because of the COVID. And then we have supervision. We have our from psychiatry clinic we organized. They support us in supervision. So we discuss individually, and so just voluntary, the people who wanted to go. For others, here in the center, we find another job. And in that time, because two colleagues, they decided they cannot go, they are too afraid. So they stay in the center as a night shift. So they had options. If they go on the field, of course, we cannot force them because they have their personal risk of burnout. Anyway, we were all almost in a burnout. But we support them on a way to give them options. If they don't want to go in the field and work, so they should stay in the center and take care about the center. And some of them that I mentioned this research, so they do some writing for Vive Žene. So calling beneficiaries do these interviews by the phone about which of their rights were not fulfilled, like I mentioned, this medical access to the schools and everything, but it was enough of us who went in the field. So I don't know in the context of your country, because you are in different contexts and harder contexts, I think that you have more reason to be afraid of going in the field, but that's how we solved it. The discussion, the open discussion, supervision, and offering something else to do. That was only what we could do in that moment.
Thank you very much, Jasna. I think we can take up the conversation at the end again, but just in the interest of time, I'd very much like to invite Jose Miguel Guzman from Sintras in Chile to give us his feedback and input from his center. Thank you.
Hola, bueno, en primer lugar, reciban todos un saludo muy afectuoso de todos quienes trabajamos en Sintras. En primer lugar, quería poner en contexto la situación que hemos vivido. Durante el periodo de COVID-19 en nuestro país, continúan vigentes una serie de medidas implementadas por el gobierno, tendientes a limitar la protesta social y las manifestaciones callejeras que se iniciaron el 18 de octubre del 2019, el llamado estallido social en nuestro país. De ahí en adelante se ha iniciado en Chile una serie de movilizaciones sociales masivas y pacíficas, exigiendo cambios profundos al modelo económico existente en nuestro país. En ese contexto también, y de violaciones sistemáticas a los derechos humanos, llegaron a nuestro país varias delegaciones internacionales que verificaron en nuestro país con sendos informes las graves violaciones a los derechos humanos que se cometieron a los manifestantes, principalmente niños, niñas y adolescentes. Todas estas delegaciones coincidieron en que se han cometido delitos gravísimos en materia de derechos humanos. Además, denunciaron vejámenes de tipo sexual, un alto número de traumas y mutilaciones oculares, lesiones de disparos en distintas partes del cuerpo también. Junto con ello, denuncian el abuso desmedido de la fuerza policial. Era recurrente las imágenes que veíamos por televisión de parte del abuso policial. El gobierno se defiende señalando que no hay violaciones sistemáticas de derechos humanos, para evitar con ello eventuales sanciones internacionales por delitos de lesa humanidad. A mediados del mes de marzo del 2020, varias regiones de nuestro país y Santiago, la capital, son declaradas en cuarentena por la presencia del COVID-19. Se restringió la movilidad y derechos de los ciudadanos, se instaura el toque de queda desde las 10 de la noche hasta las 6 de la mañana. Y lo que veíamos en esos días eran presencia de militares y carabineros en todas las estaciones de metro, en las calles, en las carreteras. En el contexto del COVID-19, los equipos especializados de salud mental a víctimas de violaciones de derechos humanos en dictadura cerraron, dejaron de atender presencialmente a sus beneficiarios y tampoco podían por ley atender a las nuevas víctimas que estaba dejando el estallido social. A comienzos del año 2020, el Instituto Nacional de Derechos Humanos registraba más de 4.000 personas lesionadas, de las cuales 1.600 eran por perdigones en distintas partes del cuerpo, 230 bombas lacrimógenas que fueron disparadas directamente al cuerpo. El caso más claro y gravísimo e inédito sentimos en nuestro país y en el mundo es el de 460 personas con mutilaciones oculares, de las cuales 2 quedaron totalmente ciegas. Con la presencia del COVID-19, las medidas implementadas por el gobierno son de tratar de intentar retomar el control y el orden público. Así lo entendíamos nosotros, instalando importantes contingentes policiales y militares en las calles de las ciudades y en las carreteras del país. No define claramente cómo se pondrá fin a la violencia policial ni a soluciones basadas en los derechos humanos. Cabe señalar que las personas encarceladas también se vieron expuestas a contagios por presencia del COVID-19. Hasta hoy día todavía quedan presos de la revuelta que se iniciara el 18 de octubre. Sintras, en este periodo, ha asumido la demanda creciente de estos nuevos consultantes con casos de tortura recientes, que solicitan tratamiento médico-psicológico y certificaciones de las torturas padecidas para acompañar las acciones legales iniciadas en contra de la policía. Era lo que nos solicitaban, informes para poder después hacer denuncias al maltrato y abuso policial. Y constatamos también en este periodo la escasa red de dispositivos de tratamiento y rehabilitación para estos casos, siendo Sintras uno de los pocos centros que proporciona atención integral a las nuevas víctimas y al trauma ocasionado por el Estado. ¿Sí? Con la instalación de las medidas por la presencia del COVID, la grave represión ejercida contra la ciudadanía no disminuyó, y en muchos casos pudo afirmar que fue en aumento. El Estado de Chile vulnera de manera sistemática y generalizada los derechos a la vida, la integridad física y psíquica, al debido proceso y la libertad de expresión de los manifestantes en las calles. En este contexto, una de las dificultades que seguimos enfrentando sigue siendo la alta demanda de parte de los afectados por represión política y los sobrevivientes de tortura del periodo de la dictadura cívico-militar, ¿sí? Porque a la anterior experiencia traumática causada, ahora se agrega el nuevo contexto político-social que se inicia en el estallido social, y además los efectos del confinamiento obligado a toda la población producidos por el COVID-19. En este contexto, las actividades que hemos realizado. Sintras, pese a las medidas decretadas por la presencia del COVID-19, ha continuado con la atención a las víctimas de la dictadura militar. Se han implementado la modalidad de atención remota, tanto individual como grupal. Al principio era rechazada, pero después rápidamente fue aceptada esta forma de trabajo. Se han realizado visitas domiciliares en situaciones de mucha gravedad. Lo que observamos en este periodo fue mucha crisis de ansiedad y deseos de muerte en muchas víctimas y familiares. Se han realizado visitas domiciliarias para los casos más extremos, ¿sí? También se ha realizado atención presencial en nuestra sede a personas que lo han solicitado por desconfianza a la hora de usar el teletrabajo. Los daños del trauma biopsicosocial en estas personas se han cronificado y profundizado en contexto de las medidas de excepción decretadas por el gobierno, toques de queda, confinamiento obligado, por la presencia del COVID, etc. Y esta situación sentimos que se ha traspasado a la segunda y tercera generación. Durante el periodo que estamos hablando, ingresaron nuevas personas al programa asistencial. Todas han recibido atención psicológica, psiquiátrica, kinesiológica, terapia ocupacional y apoyo legal, porque también se incorporó a nuestro equipo una abogada. Se han realizado talleres de kinesiterapia grupal, con la colaboración también de nuestra psicóloga clínica. En todos ellos han participado sobrevivientes de tortura, familiares de ejecutados políticos y familiares de detenidos desaparecidos, con un promedio de asistencia de 20 personas por cada taller, y ha tenido muy buena adherencia esa modalidad de trabajo. En los talleres kinesiológicos se ha trabajado los efectos del dolor crónico como consecuencia de la experiencia traumática sufrida, los estados tensionales, mejoramiento en la calidad de los movimientos, técnicas de relajación, entre otros temas. Durante este periodo también se han establecido convenios de colaboración con otras organizaciones que sentimos muy necesarias, entre ellas con la Comisión Chilena de Derechos Humanos, con la nueva agrupación que surge de víctimas y familiares de trauma ocular, ¿sí? Y con las agrupaciones históricas de detenidos desaparecidos, familiares ejecutados y sobrevivientes de tortura. Desde abril del año 2020 también, hasta la fecha, y con modalidad remota, se han implementado talleres grupales con participación abierta a todos los usuarios de Sintras, de nuestra organización, y el taller ha estado encargado por el terapeuta ocupacional, por la psicóloga y por mí en este caso. En cada sesión se han abordado distintos temas de interés por los participantes, que han incluido temas de salud, derechos humanos, el sistema previsional, la salud mental en el contexto de pandemia, situaciones de derechos humanos en el contexto del estallido social, el plebiscito, etc. Este espacio ha sido muy bien evaluado por los participantes, quienes lo han definido como un espacio de resistencia, solidaridad y apoyo y autocuidado. El promedio a estos talleres, que son semanales, de 2 horas de duración, es de un promedio de 26 personas. Lo mismo ha ocurrido con los talleres de kinesioterapia, donde la asistencia ha sido regular, sistemática y de alta adherencia. En fin, a pesar de las dificultades, hemos podido seguir dando atención a quienes lo han solicitado, esto gracias a la entrega, compromiso y atención de cada uno de quienes forman parte del equipo de Cintas. Bueno, felicitaciones a todos los que forman parte del equipo del IRCT y por este encuentro. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Jose Miguel, for that very, very interesting intervention. I just want to open the floor to anyone who may have an immediate reaction. If I understand correctly, Juma, do you have a comment about Jose Miguel, or is it a more general comment? Sorry, you're just on mute, Juma, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself. No, we're still not able to hear you, but perhaps you could look into it and maybe write to my colleague Berta. She may be able to help you. I think from my side, Jose Miguel, what I found very interesting was the fact that COVID arrives at a time or in a context of big social protests in Chile, and in a context of kind of existing crackdowns and violations on human rights in Chile. I also found it very interesting that that you had this mass presence of military and police on the street, and that triggered a lot of previous victims, because it reminded them of a previous era where that was much more normal. And that you also mentioned, as Jasna did, that you have this kind of situation of previous trauma, plus the anxiety and the social isolation from the pandemic. And the last thing I found very interesting was that you had these group workshops, and I really like that idea of offering a space for everyone to get together to discuss a wide range of topics, as a way actually of bridging the kind of social or physical isolation that we had from each other. And also, as you mentioned, to offer a space of solidarity, of reflection, and ownership. And actually, I had one question for you, Jose Miguel, because I think you mentioned that initially you had rejected telehealth, online telehealth, but then afterwards you accepted it. Can you talk a bit about what that conversation was and why you were uncomfortable with it at first, and then why you felt you had to adopt it?
A ver, las dificultades no vienen de nuestra parte. Nosotros hicimos la oferta de atención de teletrabajo a nuestros pacientes. Sin embargo, son ellos, por la experiencia de vida, por la experiencia sufrida, quienes se resistían a usar el teletrabajo. En esta porque está muy presente todavía la paranoia, la desconfianza en este tipo de medios. De que van a ser escuchados, de que los temas que ellos tienen que conversar son muy íntimos, que requieren mucho más secretismo. Entonces, al principio surge ese temor. Sin embargo, con el paso de las semanas, meses, la verdad es que a la gente le gustó la modalidad, se sintieron cómodos. Incluso en el taller grupal también ocurre la misma situación. Y de hecho, la propia red latinoamericana del IRCT, yo siento que esta modalidad llegó para quedarse. Nos hemos reunido mucho más ahora que antes. Hay mucha más coordinación hoy día que antes. Y eso, bueno, se saluda en este contexto que puede ser muy estresante para todos, pero vino para colaborar también y tal vez para mejorar, coordinar e intercambiar. Eso es lo que
Great.
ocurrió.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for José Miguel? I don't see any more. Okay, I think in that case, I would very much like to ask Lynn Walker from Tree of Life in Zimbabwe to begin her intervention. Lynn?
Yeah, thank you very much, Justin. And yes, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, some of you, and greetings from Tree of Life in Zimbabwe. I do have a presentation which is really more a set of photographs. So I will share that with you. So yeah, I'm from Tree of Life Trust of Zimbabwe. Tree of Life Trust is an organization that offers trauma healing to survivors of torture and also to communities affected by torture and organized violence, politically motivated collective violence. And although we offer a range of different activities at individual level, also at community level, we respond to immediate incidents of violations of torture and rights abuses. We do tend to focus much more at the restorative end of the spectrum, and our trauma healing work is mainly about supporting survivors of torture, their families and their communities to sort of reintegrate and to restore and to move on with their lives. And so we also are a survivor implemented organisation. So the core team that I work with are primarily survivors of torture or collective violence. And we work with a network of community volunteers who are all survivors of torture or collective violence themselves. And the way that we work is very much around restorative processes, which are focused on reconnecting with yourself, reconnecting with your family, reconnecting with your community. So we're very much based in the community, working in the community, working using a group approach, bringing people together, going through a restorative process, but which is very much collective. And so obviously, COVID-19 and the initial lockdown, which we experienced in March 2020, meant that our normal way of working, our normal approach and the support network that we offer in the community had to be completely rethought. None of the things that we would normally do were possible in a COVID situation. So we really had to have a complete rethink. Added to that, the lockdown, as many other people have spoken about, was really overlaying existing human rights violations in Zimbabwe. We were already in a situation of escalating political violence, increased intimidation and harassment of human rights defenders, increased targeting of human rights defenders, and targeting of communities that were perceived to be opposition support strongholds. And so already we were in a very difficult situation where there was huge fear and intimidation. And then when our first lockdown happened in March, we saw police and army deployed into the streets. And as one of the previous speakers said, really giving flashbacks to the clients we were working with and the communities we were working with from the election violence in 2018, the brutal government response to protests on the streets in 2019. So it really exacerbated the trauma, exacerbated the fear. And overlaid on that was the fear around the virus itself and the sort of bereavement, the loss and grief as people started to lose loved ones. And also the clients that we were working with reported that their isolation, actually, to many of them, reminded them of their time in custody, and it was really triggering their trauma again. And they were reliving the difficult situations that they've been through. So the lockdown was really overlaid on a really difficult situation already. And as I say, Tree of Life, we had to completely rethink the way we work. We worked with a team that had really strong skills of working at community level, but we weren't able to get into the community. We had roadblocks preventing movement. We had really strict regulations and brutal dealing of even the minor infringements of the lockdown measures. And so the first thing we did back in the very early days of the lockdown was focus on completely retraining our core team and training them to use remote counselling, telecounselling. We're fortunate to have the psychotherapist trainer working with us who developed the training, trained the team, and then supervised them while they actually use their skills. That was really alien to the Tree of Life team, but I was amazed how quickly they adapted and were able to use that. And so we had about over 300 clients on our caseload that needed to be contacted, and the team were given a case log and they contacted every single one, and they stayed in touch with those people throughout the first lockdown. Once the lockdown measures were relaxed a bit around August last year, then we were able to do some more small group training, first with our own team, and then we were able to reconnect with our community facilitators. And one of the things that we heard from the network of community facilitators that we work in, about 150 of them, is that the overwhelming impact it had on them, because they were used to supporting people in the community on a regular basis, sometimes on a weekly basis, and they at first weren't able to do that. And they found the remote way of working very difficult. Some of them didn't even have the resources to do that. So we were able to supply them with airtime, with data, sometimes with devices, access to devices, so that they could reconnect with the people they were supporting in the community. But they actually needed a lot of support themselves. They really found the situation very difficult, high levels of vicarious trauma. And so we started off actually developing a package to actually help our community facilitators to deal with that very overwhelming situation, a very overwhelming situation they found themselves in. So we used a process that we would use in our normal training, which is the action and reflection learning cycle, building on skills of observing what's happening in the community, really heightening and developing listening skills, and listening skills in a different in a different way, having to sort of listen to people through social media platforms rather than sitting with them and listening to them directly, and actually linking people up with support networks. And we developed training materials to address that. And then we actually adapted them to be very specific to the COVID situation. So we brought in elements of dealing with grief and mourning. Our most difficult period was actually sort of January to May this year, when we had our third wave, which was really devastating. And many of our community facilitators were affected. They either were infected with COVID themselves, or they lost friends, family, relatives, and were dealing with grief and mourning, but were prevented from using the usual sort of cultural coping mechanisms, the cultural responses to grief and mourning, which was very, very distressing for them. So with the help of IRCT, we first of all developed something called psychosocial first aid, a tool that we intended to use with our community facilitators. And we developed a manual, a workbook, and a couple of videos that we recorded that they were able to access on WhatsApp platforms and other social media platforms. And then when we were able to get into the communities, the team were really courageous in being prepared to go out into the community and to reach out to our community facilitators. And so we spent a lot of time talking about how to stay safe, how to prevent transmission, how to prevent putting communities at risk and ourselves at risk. And then the team went out with the training materials and delivered this in small group sessions. There you've got some of the photographs of where that was done. And then the feedback we got from the community facilitators was that how much this psychosocial first aid had really helped them to cope with their own vicarious trauma, those feelings of being overwhelmed, feelings of really not being able to support their clients in the way that they felt they should do. And that they wanted to use these tools in their communities. So we then did a training of trainers process where we trained them to use the materials and roll them out in the community. So the materials really were a combination of information about how to reintegrate people back into their community in a situation where social connections were fragmented and social connections are broken down, how to re-establish those social connections, but also a lot around coping skills for yourself, coping skills for your family, coping skills for your community, and lots of tools around how to regulate and manage your own anxiety, to manage your own feelings of fear and panic attacks, and how to share those with the community. And so the focus is very much on resilience building at community level. So we developed a workbook, a manual, 2 videos. We trained the community facilitators to use those in their own communities. And we actually went out into the communities. At first, when we'd done this, there was a reintroduction of restrictive measures. And so at first this was done on a one-on-one basis or sometimes with families. The community facilitators then found other opportunities to do this. So where there were church gatherings, very small church gatherings at first, and then larger ones. But also we were able to sort of piggyback on COVID awareness activities. And in fact, the team were trained in COVID information and later in vaccine uptake materials as well, so that they could piggyback this on the COVID awareness and community education. And that was a really important learning for us, because it gave us access to communities where we wouldn't normally have had it. By actually going to the authorities and saying, look, we're going to be doing COVID awareness, we were able to access communities that normally would be under very strong surveillance and we wouldn't be able to access. So it actually gave us an opening into those communities. So in terms of the learning that we had, one of the really strong learnings was that although we completely adapted our approach, that being community-based and having the soft skills that our team had and the community facilitators had really meant they could be very agile and very flexible. And it was a really strong foundation for working in a very different way. Because we've been in the community and our community facilitators were from the communities, they were trusted, so that they had access in situations where maybe we wouldn't already have had. And we had some sort of triangulation on that, because we did actually get invited by a humanitarian agency to work in a completely different community where there was a lot of anxiety and stress around COVID. And we used the materials in that community as well. And although they did have an impact, and people did say that it was beneficial, the impact was nowhere near as great as it was when we were working in communities where we already had that foundation of the work at community level. I suppose the other learning we made was that although remote working and tele counselling is really helped us to get through and to stay in touch with our clients, and as one of the previous speakers said, that was really, really important. People really needed that sense of connection, needed that sense of being not alone and being supported. It was only an interim measure, and that really we needed to get back into the community as soon as we could. So we did a lot of training with our team about how to do this in a safe way, and we actually invested a lot in making sure that they had the resources they needed to keep themselves safe and to keep the communities safe. But what we did feel on reflection was that where we're struggling to gain access to clients, where we're struggling to gain access to communities affected by torture and collective violence, this is a really good alternative methodology. And also we do have some clients that are geographically very isolated and very remote, and we've always struggled to reach out to them and support them in the community. So we felt that this was a really good tool where we were struggling to physically support people. So we would definitely keep it in our toolbox for the future. But I mean, one of the really clear learnings for me was just how adaptable and flexible and agile my team were, and how ready they were to do what was necessary. I mean, we had a time when we were all of us working from home. We weren't even able to get into the office, and people were prepared to work from home, to put measures in place to make sure that they had a safe place to work and somewhere where they could maintain confidentiality, and they were prepared to work whenever it was necessary, so working any hours of the day and night whenever the clients really were able to be contacted and were able to talk to them in a safe way. So I would really like to sort of thank IRCT, because the resources you gave us enabled us to really adapt and develop some training tools and resources that we wouldn't have had already, and it has really helped us broaden our skill set for the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Lynn. I think for me, very interesting to hear, and also the very specific challenges around the fact that you are so community and group oriented, and that being together in groups is so important. And of course, that's one of the things that's hardest hit at a time where you're not allowed to be around other people. And what I'm very happy to hear is that, and I think that's a big learning I think for a lot of industries, but especially ours, is that the soft skills in our positions and your positions as kind of leaders in your communities and the community facilitators that you have, that trust that you have within communities actually gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility and agility to respond to things. And those are things that are, I mean, those are aspects that are hard to capture in, black and white on a piece of paper, but they are such a massive foundation of the work we do, and so valuable, and one of the key assets also to the leadership that Lisa mentioned earlier in her comment. Then there's a question for you from Juma, and he asks, how were you able to convince your clients to accept the new methods of interventions since COVID had interrupted the services? Jose Miguel mentioned a little bit their experience earlier, but I was just wondering from your experience how that worked.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much for the question. Actually, from our experience, the clients themselves were very receptive to this different way of working. I think they felt really isolated, as I say, all those flashbacks to their previous experiences, and they felt very alone. And often they were actually living in very difficult physical circumstances, sometimes with domestic violence, substance abuse going on within the household. So any form of contact was welcome. And so we didn't actually struggle to convince the clients. And one of our biggest challenges was actually their ability to be contactable. So we actually did divert some of our resources that we had for in-person working to making sure that they had airtime, that they had data if necessary, and to identifying ways that they could get access to devices which we felt was safe and where they could be in a place where confidentiality was ensured. So we spent a lot of time sort of working with the community facilitators to facilitate that enabling environment. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any other immediate reactions to Lynn's presentation? I see Lisa's hand in the air and Hugh as well. So maybe we go to Lisa first and then Hugh afterwards.
Thanks, Dustin. And thanks, Lynn, and also Jose Miguel. I didn't have a chance to comment there, but I have a question which goes to both of you. I find it really interesting that in the times of such deep crisis, that both your organizations made the choice to work with other partners that you didn't seem to work with so much before. And I just wondered, why did you make that choice? What was the cost, or what was the benefit you saw in doing that? This thing about cooperating with other partners.
Yeah, and shall I go first? Yeah. Well, one of the approaches that we used was to really work with our community facilitators to map their own communities, to observe what was happening in their own communities, and to look for some mechanisms within their own communities. And that meant that we really did have to sort of identify agencies, partners that we wouldn't have worked with in the past, and maybe you hadn't have trusted in the past or were been a bit suspicious about. So it was something that we really had to do. There was an imperative to really regain that social connectiveness within communities affected by torture and for individuals who were survivors of torture. So it was really an imperative that we had to do, and it was a real learning experience and a very beneficial one. And I mean, one of the knock-on effects of that is the amount of interest and requests we've had from some organisations for us to train them in our approaches so that they can carry on that work. So that's been a really sort of positive impact of this very difficult time.
Bueno, respecto a la situación de Sintras en Chile, tiene que ver con las nuevas formas que usó el Estado, el gobierno, de maltratar y abusar a las personas. Este fenómeno del trauma ocular tan masivo generó nuevas víctimas, una situación, insisto, inédita para nuestro país y para el mundo. En menos de 2 meses, más de 460 personas sufrieron trauma ocular grave, gravísimo, y por lo tanto nuestro contacto fue con las agrupaciones que se crearon a propósito de esa situación, víctimas y familiares de trauma ocular, incluso organizaciones que se congregan para dar atención a estas personas. Entonces nos asociamos con ellos para entregar la experiencia, capacitar, cómo enfrentar el trauma psicosocial producido desde el Estado. Es esa principalmente la razón por la cual nos hemos acercado, y ellos también nos han solicitado capacitación para ver esta nueva forma de maltrato del Estado hacia la gente y cómo abordar las consecuencias psicosociales, psicológicas en estas víctimas, nuevas víctimas. Insistimos, esto está cursando, todavía no se logra dimensionar el impacto que esto va a tener, no solamente en las víctimas, sino que también en nuestra sociedad, a la gente que hoy día se manifiesta, a la gente que hoy día protesta en las calles, etc. Lo vimos lamentablemente después en las manifestaciones y protestas en Colombia y Ecuador, una situación que se parece demasiado, lamentablemente. Eso.
Thank you very much, José Miguel. Hugh, and I've got Peter Chiama afterwards. Hugh?
Thanks, Dastan. I thought Lisa was going to ask the same question I'm about to ask, because, and it's to Lynn and to Jose Miguel. I mean, it's about telehealth, and I mean, we had a little discussion about it in a meeting today. It's just to understand whether, to get the insights from the field, you know, whether telehealth is a great new future for torture rehabilitation, or, as you said, Lynn, maybe it's just a temporary measure and you want to go back to meeting face to face, because obviously there's benefits of, you can meet more people, maybe per work hour, but then obviously internet connections might be slow and not everybody has access, but then you've got other benefits that you can be more frequently meeting people. And I wonder whether at the moment we're able to say whether, you know, is there a way telehealth could be the big new future for member centres like yourselves, or whether actually is it just something that's had to happen during COVID and we'll go back to the old way of working? Thanks very much.
Shall I go first? Okay, yeah, thanks, Hugh. I mean, for us, it isn't the new way of working, because the first slide I showed how we used to work pre-COVID. So working with groups, very important, you know, to re-establishing social connections and family connections. So this was just a way of responding to the COVID situation. But for us, it wouldn't be a new way of working. But what we do feel is that we might indeed have a hybrid sort of approach. So we would definitely, with our initial work with our clients, use that group approach, that community-based approach. But we do have a number that need referral for more specialist services, and that the tele context, rather than
I think she's
Yeah,
frozen.
I think we've lost Lynn, but maybe José Miguel, you could.
Sí. Bueno, como decía Lynn, yo pienso que hemos implementado a medida que se han ido levantando las fases de movilidad en la población y en la ciudad, una situación híbrida. Para nuestros compañeros es súper importante que el primer contacto, sobre todo aquellas personas que consultan por primera vez para solicitar atención en psicoterapia u otras formas de atención, es súper importante la presencialidad. Esa primera entrevista donde podemos ver y hacer lecturas gestuales de movimiento y generar el vínculo necesario para este tipo de intervenciones, la presencialidad. Y tal vez yo sí siento que esta forma de atención llegó para quedarse. En nuestro país hay un desarrollo tecnológico que nos permite en algunos sectores, por lo menos de las grandes ciudades, hacer este tipo de atención. Lo mismo ocurrió con el trabajo grupal. Ahora, lamentablemente yo siento que se instaló en la población el miedo al contagio. Los medios de comunicación han contribuido mucho a esa situación y por lo tanto mucha gente hoy día todavía, pese a que se han levantado ciertas restricciones, la gente todavía tiene miedo a salir de la casa, a juntarse en grandes colectivos, usar la locomoción colectiva y ese tipo de cosas. Por lo tanto, para ellos hoy día sigue siendo una forma cómoda esta forma del teletrabajo, la teleatención, como lo hemos llamado aquí. Así que, pero por ahora yo siento que es útil, sirve y supera los temores de la gente.
Thank you very much, José Miguel. I just want to give the floor to Peter Kiama. I think he's had his hand raised for a while, waiting patiently. Peter?
Thank you, Dustin, for the chance to ask my question. My name is Peter Kiama from Kenya, working at the Independent Medical Legal Unit. Thanks, Jose and other colleagues for the presentation. My question is about teletherapy, and because during COVID, we had a big challenge reaching out to survivors of torture outside Nairobi, especially for individual sessions. And I would like to hear from the speakers how they manage this, especially for individual sessions, because we realized that group sessions were a bit easier. You could speak to a group because the level of confidentiality was maybe not as much as individual sessions, where you also need to have the nonverbal communication. So just to understand that, because we are curious to learn and apply whatever lessons and whatever good things have come out of that teletherapy. Thank you much.
I don't know if I could ask Yasna if that's something you could speak to. I just appreciate that that the other two presenters had spoken more recently, but is that something you could speak to, Yasna? She's just on mute at the moment, but if not, actually, I would be very happy to open the floor more broadly, and maybe we could have this discussion all together. So is there anyone, and really anyone who would like to respond or share some of their practices with Peter? I see Suraj. Suraj, your hand. Suraj, would you like to come in on it?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dastan, and thank you all the presenters for a wonderful presentation. And I think that is really a lot of, is quite insightful. Especially, I will also appreciate the, the effort and the role of facilitation that IRCT has made, especially on, the providing the immediate support to the torture survivors in this very difficult time. So in particular, in the context of Nepal as well, just I would like to share and some of the, I would like to highlight some of the, the work that we have done in collaboration with IRCT. We have actually provided a very immediate, the essential stuffs to more than 40, the family members. Also, we have mobilized immediately one of the psychosocial counselors in the affected communities, especially in the western part of the countries, where they have received individual sessions and also the group, the interventions, where the people, they came together. And the most importantly, we also conducted one of the, the stress care for caregiver workshops to the frontline defenders and the psychosocial councils and other associates. Actually they are also quite overwhelmed and also having a lot of issues, and so many people they are themselves infected. And as we all know that this prolonged lockdown has a lot of implications in the livelihood of the people. So that's why the immediate relief and the support that was provided in collaboration with IRCT was hugely appreciated in the community. And in addition to that, we also facilitated to start this, income generating activities to some of the, the very poor families from the affected communities. And very pleased to say that some of them are really doing a great job. And I think it also has given the opportunity in terms of, the coming together in the difficult time, helping each other, and also and strengthening our existing networks to make the things more normalized. That's what I wanted to share, Dastan. Thank you so much for giving this floor.
Thank you very much. I was also wondering if anyone would like to speak to Peter's point about the challenge of doing group and individual telehealth in the context of the pandemic. I see Juana's hand is in the air. Juana?
Hola, sí, buenos días, de acá de Perú, de CAPS, Perú. Muchas gracias por la oportunidad. Creo que en este trabajo de personas que han sido afectadas por el tema no solamente de la pandemia, sino que han sufrido tortura, como vemos, el cuerpo es el que se ha puesto en esa situación de sufrimiento. Y a veces el cuerpo también transmite, al menos para los psicólogos, cierta comunicación. Entonces era un gran desafío, es un gran desafío poder trabajar en en teleconferencia, porque poder unir, ¿no es cierto?, lo que le pasa al cuerpo y poder unir las emociones es un trabajo de integración bastante difícil, donde no podemos perder de vista todo lo que nos comunica a veces el cuerpo, el estado, ¿no es cierto?, emocional. No solamente es a través de la palabra, y a veces tenemos como que imaginarnos un poco cómo está esa persona y utilizar nuestra contratransferencia, nuestras emociones para poder unir, ¿no es cierto?, aquello que en algún momento dado pudo haber sido disociado. Creo que si bien es cierto, ¿no es cierto?, que esta modalidad nos ha ayudado muchísimo en poder seguir acompañando, también a veces hemos sentido que necesitamos la presencialidad, pero por el COVID no se podía dar, ¿verdad? Porque estábamos atravesados tanto terapeutas como pacientes por la misma situación. Así que bueno, pero de todas maneras hemos podido lograr acercarnos. Yo les agradezco mucho esto porque nos da la oportunidad de seguir pensando en poder agudizar mejor nuestro instrumento de trabajo. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Juana. The floor is open for any other interventions or comments from colleagues. Very happy to hear about other experiences, lessons learned, key measures that worked, what didn't work. If not, then I think, yeah, we've got around 4 minutes left. So all there's left for me is to say thank you very, very much. I understand, Berta, that we'll have a little survey. I would very much like to thank you all. It's so inspiring and it's so great to hear. As many of you know, I was in charge of distributing the grants from the IRCT. So I got to see and read about all the amazing things you're doing, and it's really very inspiring and amazing to hear about the incredible work you're doing. I would like to offer the last word to our Secretary General, Lisa Henry, to see if she has any final comments. I know that we have a lot of meetings scheduled coming up, and I would just like to offer her the opportunity.
Thank you, Dustin, and I willingly accept, and I also would like to applaud both the work of staff and of course, torture survivors around the world who find ways to cope during this, global pandemic, and also the staff of IRCT who have been, I think, exceptionally good during this period at listening to what you're saying from the ground and trying to respond to the needs that we see out there. It's true that there are many governments who are using the cover of a global pandemic to act with impunity and to increase I would say some of the human rights abuses that go on. So we have almost a double battle here that we're waging. It's against the torture pandemic, but also the COVID pandemic. Nevertheless, seeing this kind of solidarity and coming together and willingness to share from around the globe your experiences, I think this really shows the strength. I do think there are some opportunities for us, and I've heard from this webinar today, things about telehealth or a hybrid model. So, keep track of the lessons learned. Let's not go too quickly back if and when you might be in a country where you're coming out of the pandemic. I really think we have to harvest what we've learned. Let's be smart and take these learnings forward. So I've heard learnings about telehealth. I really have heard learnings about new partners and new relationships. I think many people and many NGOs and individuals during COVID-19 have been able to see organizations like yours as a super important part of the humanitarian community. And maybe there's even more respect for the work of psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, human rights lawyers, defenders, in organizations like yours than ever before. We're an intrinsic part of the humanitarian community. And I think the services you provide are needed by many more than I think realized beforehand. So I think this is something we should hold on to and think about how can we be even of more service moving forward to capitalize on the skill set that you have, which is quite unique. I would like to say then, gatherings like this are, for us, I think, going to be the way we work moving forward. It's not that we'll never meet in person, we will also do that. But we're really happy to see you on the screen like this, with your cameras on, with your names on the screen, with your organization names and your countries. We feel, the global solidarity is super important, and we'll continue to do this. So as Dustin was saying, there are planned already now some regional consultations where you can talk with your colleagues in your region on webinars facilitated by IRCT. There will also be a celebration of the 30th anniversary of the Torture Journal. So our own scientific journal, and on November 17th or November 18th, depending upon which time zone you are in, you will hear a phenomenal panel of experts, some of them yourselves, debating what have we learned during 30 years? What kind of research has been done? What lessons have we harvested? What challenges have we not yet tackled? And problems that we still are facing, ongoing problems. So I welcome you to join as much as possible. We know you have a 24/7 job, which is treating survivors face to face. So the time you can give to a global movement is maybe limited, but the time you give is incredibly important. So we thank you for your time and for your commitment, and wish you a good morning or afternoon or evening as you move forward with your work. Thanks, Dustin. Back to you.
Thank you. And I think, Berta, we have a survey which we would love for you all. It shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes. So I hand over to Berta.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll display it now. Now it's launched. And yeah, we would appreciate if you could take one last minute to respond to these 3 questions. And say bye before you leave.
Thank you all very much. Have a good morning, good
Thank you,
afternoon, or good
Yasna.
Un
evening.
saludo fraterno para
Thank you very
todos.
much. Thank you all.
Saludos a todos.
Adiós.
Bye, Duma.
Centros.
Adios.
Bye,
Bye,
Lynn.
Everyone.
IRCT. Un abrazo.
Lynn, thank you very
Bye.
much.
Take care,
Okay,
everyone.
Thank you, Jose.
Bye, everyone.
Muchísimas,
And thank you,
muchísimas
Yasna.
gracias.
Amazing.
Muchísimas
Muchas
gracias desde
gracias.
Perú.
Muchas
Muchas
gracias.
gracias. Gracias, Noemi.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Chao, chao.
Hi, Mohammed. Nice to see you with us. And Juma, nice to have you here, Hilda, Yatira.
Au revoir, Daniel. Au revoir.
Bye.
Ciao,
Bye.
Yasna. Thank you. Huh?
Adios.
Ciao. Ciao.
Bye.
No one is
Yadira,
leaving. Goodbye.
No, you have to go. Goodbye.
Bye, Guillermo. Thank you for
Bye,
waking
Guillermo.
up.
Thank you for waking up.
Chao,
Adiós,
Berta.
Yeah, Guillermo,
yeah.
you win the prize.
Chao,
Hey.
Dastan.
Yeah.
Felicitaciones. Que
Chao,
estén bien.
chao, José Miguel. Mantenemos
Gracias, José
contacto.
Miguel.
Chao.
Chao.
Vanker, he's staying there. I mean, it's amazing. But well done.
And
And on your
Daniel,
birthday,
yeah.
you did a beautiful job. That's your biggest birthday present.
Exactly. Happy birthday now.